All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and for a few months now, we've been taking a detour into some Bible decodes as all a part of the Reciprocal Church unit. At first, we started doing things that you can use in your own life to build your own religion, build your own rituals or practices, things that you can believe in, that you can trust in. Those things like maps of meditation states that you can repeat, and sacred music, sacred geometry and mathematics, the laws of physics. These are things that you can trust because you can do them over and over again and you'll keep getting the same results. And they have equations attached to them that work every time. And they are involving perfection. The perfection of the geometrical shapes, the exact volume of these various platonic solids, and we are putting this reciprocal church together because the rug is about to be pulled away from all of the Western religions. This includes Christianity, it includes Judaism, Islam, it includes Satanism, and it includes atheism or scientism. All of these things are going to fall by the wayside from the lack of credible evidence, and in many cases an incredible amount of evidence against the existence of the veracity of these holy books. Now, I'm particularly talking about the holy books, not necessarily the practices or the experience of the person. If you feel like you have that you have Jesus in your heart, or you feel like Jesus walks with you, that's your own experience. Somebody else might call it something different than Jesus, but this unit is not referring to that. It's not referring to the existence of God. It's not referring to the efficacy of prayer when done properly. It's not saying that if you don't believe in, if you believe in Jesus, that you will have everlasting life. It's not even saying that. It's specifically focused on, in this case, the New Testament. The Old Testament as well, but the New Testament covers both Christianity and Satanism. There is no real Satan in the Old Testament. There's a bunch of competitive gods to Yahweh, Moloch and Asherah and Baal. But the supernatural Satan, all of those gods in the Old Testament are gods with a small g. God with a capital G cut out of the whole script at during the sixth day. So didn't even make it through the first chapter of Genesis before God went to sleep and was replaced by Yahweh, who is not a god, but a god with a small g, meaning more powerful than humans, but flawed in a bazillion different ways, including obsessive compulsive disorder and zealousness and jealousness and being a control freak and sociopathy and this God was basically given an exorcism in the beginning of Christianity and divided itself into a more perfect God but left behind Jesus and Satan. So that was the trade-off. Either way, you're going to fail with these in the long run because there's no evidence for them. And that's what we're looking at here. We've been looking at the, I believe this is the Bible Decode 130, and we've been looking at the book of Michael Maniscalco called Christianity's Origins as a Flavian Secrecy Cult. And the Flavians were the dynasty of Caesars that ruled the Roman Empire from 69 to 96 AD. They include Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian. And they wrote the New Testament. And they left their mark behind to make sure that you would eventually figure that out. They actually signed their name to the New Testament. They gave you an autographed copy to show you that they did it. They didn't want to be discovered in their own lifetimes, but they did want to be discovered eventually. And the reason why they did it is because it was a psychological operation from the Roman Empire to mellow out or prune or domesticate or tame the Jews, because the Jews, they felt the Jews were demons, that they just acted with such kind of militarism. The Roman Empire had hundreds of other nations under their umbrella, and none of them were as difficult to manage as the Jews, because the Jews had this separatist God, Yahweh, with all these personality quirks, and he gave them to his chosen people. So these chosen people were very xenophobic, separatist, and they inherited all of these quirky rituals, complex kosher food laws, and complex rituals for sacrificing the lamb, and a complex schedule of animal sacrifices and circumcision and strictures against graven images. All of these things upset the Romans, because the Romans their MO was to absorb all of the nations into their empire, including their religions. They accepted everybody's religion and just said, yeah, it's a big melting pot. Like, put your religion in there. You can worship whatever you want as long as you put this statue of Caesar inside your temple. That was pretty much the give and take, and the Jews were willing to die to avoid that because of the strictures against graven images, and, among other things. And so, this was going on, had been going on for over a century, up till the final culmination, which was the War of the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. And the Jews were waiting for a Messiah. There were Messiahs predicted to be coming in the first century from Old Testament prophecies. And but the Messiah they were waiting for was a military leader who would help the Jews kick out the Romans or whoever the colonial power was that was over them in Judea. It had been the Babylonians and the Persians and the Seleucids. So now it was the Romans. And the Romans knew this. And so instead of, and there were several candidates for this Messiah, including Eleazar, John, and Simon, who were the three Jewish zealots who rose up and helped the Jews kick out the Herod puppet government of Rome in 66 AD out of Jerusalem. And so Nero was the emperor at this point, and he sent in his general, Vespasian to quell the revolt and maintain control in Jerusalem. The whole thing took 7 years. 3 years plus was Vespasian was there. In the meantime, Emperor Nero was assassinated. A string of 3 more emperors were appointed and assassinated within 12 months. And then finally they gave the call to Vespasian. And he left to go to Rome to become emperor, and he appointed his son Titus to be the new general. And it took Titus another 3 years to finally defeat the Jews. So 7 years of fighting, for the Romans to maintain control there. Both Titus and Vespasian were wounded in the war. And so it is no surprise that when they got back, they wrote the New Testament. So instead of the Jews being looking for a military leader to help throw off Rome, they wrote about a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, turning the other cheek to oppression, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack, believing that the Roman slave owner had the greatest faith in all of Israel, and telling his father that he should forgive the Jews, for they know not what they do. At the same time, Jesus is out there in front of the Jewish temple, overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers who are getting rid of the graven images money of the Romans and trading it for the Jewish money that the Jews could bring into the temple for offerings, and to upset the commerce of the Jews who were out there selling doves and pigeons for the ritual of the animal sacrifice in the temple. So Jesus is disrupting the Jewish rituals at the same time as being completely pro-Roman in orientation, never doing a damn thing against the Romans in the entire Gospels. So that is pretty introductory evidence that the Romans might have had something to do with the writing of the Gospels. But it was also right down the alley of the MO of the Romans to create religions. Titus himself created 2 religions other than Christianity. And other Romans created other cults and religions at the same time. And the Romans had a monopoly on censorship. If something was written in the Roman Empire and Caesar didn't like it, it wasn't going anywhere. The Romans were the only people within the empire to have thousands of slaves to serve as human copy machines to write these texts over and over and over and over again. And they also had a monopoly on the publishing or the distribution, because they had the only postal service in the empire. So there is no possibility of a gospel being written in Greek, not Aramaic, not Hebrew, but Greek, the language of the Romans, along with Latin. Latin was more of a elite language, but for Greek was only the upper crust of the Jews spoke Greek. Jesus and his disciples would have been speaking in Aramaic. And so they pretty much, this is prima facie evidence that they did it. But this is only scratching the surface of the evidence that there is. Because what they did is that they wrote the Gospels and they backdated the story by 40 years into the early 30s AD. Jesus had a 3-year ministry in Judea. At the same time that the Romans were writing the Gospels, they were also writing a history of this war against the Jews. And the book is called The War of the Jews, or otherwise known as Jewish War. And they wrote this under the authorship of a person named Josephus. And according to Josephus's own autobiography, he wrote this 7-volume work, and it had the endorsement of Emperor Titus, and it came from Caesar's palace in Rome, where Josephus lived as the court historian for the Romans. And his name was actually Flavius Josephus of the Flavian dynasty, because he was adopted by Vespasian. According to his autobiography, he was a Jew who was one of the generals fighting in this war, but then he eventually surrendered to Vespasian, and at that point had an epiphany that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews, and so he defected to the Romans. He predicted that Vespasian would one day become emperor, and when Vespasian did become emperor, he picked up Josephus on his way back to Rome, pardoned him, and put him up at a townhouse in Caesar's palace and adopted him into his family. Almost the same identical story also occurs with the Jews, with this guy, Johanan ben Zakkai, who was the founder of Rabbinical Judaism, which is the kind of the Pharisaic line of Judaism that branched off here at the end of the War of the Jews. And they established a little campus at Jamnia where they started working on the Talmud, the famous Jewish text that was developed over the course of a few centuries. But that is all from the Flavians as well at the very same time. So this is exactly the MO of the Romans. Now, what Michael Menescotz does is he looks at the book of Josephus and the New Testament and tries to find parallels between them. And he finds that they parody each other. One parodies the other. Now, Jesus has a 3-year ministry in Judea in the early 30s. Titus has a 3-year military campaign in Judea in the early 70s. Every place that Titus goes during his military, during the history, that documents his military campaign, these are the exact same places that Jesus goes, in the same order. And every place they go, they encounter a little event or adventure that while not being the same, they are of the same type, or they have the same concepts. And so Titus and Jesus have parallel stories. And they also, there's another pattern of parallels where the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled by Titus, literally, according to Jewish war. So what that does is that it makes Titus the second coming of Jesus. We're not looking for the second coming of Jesus right now, because it's already been documented to have happened in 70 AD. And church fathers and so on have known this throughout the ages. Josephus used to be part of the Christian Bible for some sects, and it still is for the preterist sect. And, these parallels are well known, but the extent of them and the viciousness of them are not well known. until Menescot's work, which just came out about 6 months ago. That's Menasgotz. And he looked at the book of Luke and the War of the Jews, and he found 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. That's over 10 per chapter. Some of the parallels are, albeit admittedly weak. Some of them are incredibly strong and devastating. Some of them are a little in between, and some of them are incredibly well hidden. Some of them you need some other background information to be able to decipher. He admits that there probably are a lot more that he didn't find, but he feels that they will all fit the same pattern because he put them up on a chart. He put the book of Luke on the vertical axis and Josephus on the horizontal axis. Wherever he found those 250 parallels, each parallel he put a dot on the chart at the corresponding location. And after filling in the chart, he discovered that he had not just a random pattern, but actually 5 near perfect letters in Latin, the language of the Roman elite. And those letters were A, P, T, V, S. Now, the TVS, I think, is obviously Titus Vespasianus. This is a sequence that they actually used on their coins that they minted during their reign. So there are coins that say TVS, which stands for Titus Vespasianus. And the AP, I believe, stands for Arius Piso or Aegian Pneuma. Arius Piso was a shadow figure who was an intimate to the Roman royals Vespasian and Titus. And Aegian Pneuma stands for the Holy Spirit. So that could be Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Not sure which it is. Doesn't matter too much, because the main point is that not only did the Romans write the New Testament, but they literally signed their name to it. And, you know, if you don't get it, then you are losing out because you failed the test, because the parallels are way too strong to ignore. Now, you know, if you dig into it, that's the great thing about it, is that you can get yourself a copy of Josephus free online and compare it yourself. Go through, although that's what we're doing here in these episodes, is we're going through these parallels one at a time. We've actually gotten to the section where he's going over the A and the P. These are much weaker parallels. You can see, if you look on the thumbnail of the diagram, that the A and the P are very sparse. Like, they're just like straight lines that don't have any width to them. Whereas the S and the V especially are heavily populated with dots. And those parallels for the V and the S are just much stronger. The theory is that those were written first, and then the A and the P and possibly the T, the Titus, came in later. And then the hypothesis of Joseph Atwill is that the A and the P, well, he doesn't know about the AP-TVS pattern, but he believes that Emperor Domitian wrote the kind of the third draft of War of the Jews. Like, so Vespasian wrote one, and then Titus added on to it, and then Domitian added on to that. Other school of thought is that Domitian was against it, and he actually banished Arius Piso to a remote location away from Rome during his reign until he was assassinated. Anyway, okay, so let's look at some of these weak parallels here. Jewish War 88, Book 1, Chapter 13, Paragraph 4. Now at Galilee he gave them gifts. Antigonus devoted many women with them. They waited for Herod to be informed of their treachery. but they saw the guards not far away. And this matches up with Luke 23:55. The women who came with him from Galilee came and saw the grave, bringing spices. And if you look in Matthew, it does confirm that at the grave the sepulcher had a guard, and because Jesus was viewed as a deceiver. So the commonalities there are gifts and women, Galilee, guards, and treachery. Okay, this is Jewish War 89. Next paragraph, I guess. Phasaelus reproached or chastised the governor to his face for this treacherous plot, but promised he would give him more money. But the Parthians seized upon Phasaelus and put him in prison. Luke 23:16. Pilate said, I will chastise Jesus and release him, who for a certain sedition made in the city and for murder was cast into prison. So chastisement, releasing, sedition, and cast into prison. You know, these things could certainly be, both of these last two parallels could certainly be a coincidence, absolutely no doubt. But when there are 250 of them, then it starts getting hard to explain them away as 250 of them just in the book of Luke. Then it becomes hard to, you know, and especially when some of them are much more detailed and intricate than the ones that we've just gone over. Okay, this is Jewish War 92, paragraph 92. Herod greeted a fortification called Herodium, which is Herod's own sepulcher, a giant mound in which nobody had been laid before. And at a place called Rhesa, R-E-H-E-S-A, which he says is derived from the word head. Apparently Rhesa was also Jesus and Joseph's forefather, according to the genealogy in Luke. Herod was met by his brother Joseph, who advised him as a counselor to retain only some followers, so he left 800 men to guard the women. And this is matched up with Luke 23:50. Behold, a man named Joseph, a counselor, a good and just man of Arimathea. He took the body of Jesus down at Golgotha, the place of the skull, and laid it in a sepulchre hewn in stone, which had not been used before. And the women from Galilee followed after. The women observed the tomb, which Matthew indicated was guarded. So the women are being guarded, and Joseph, the counselor, the place of the skull or the head, the sepulcher hewn in stone, or the sepulcher just in general, and the women from Galilee. Okay, next one. Jewish War 93 and 94. Antigonus bit off Hyrcanus's ears with his teeth as he fell down upon his knees. I actually know somebody who's now deceased who actually did bite off one of my friend's ears. Not the whole thing, but just a chunk of it. So that's pretty crazy. And Antigonus bit off Hyrcanus's ears with his teeth as he fell down upon his knees. So he could not take the high priesthood. But Phasaelus, though he neither had command of his sword nor his hands, prevented all abuses by dashing his head against a stone. As he expired, he was relieved to learn that Herod had escaped. And then if you read a little bit of Josephus's later work, The Antiquities of the Jews, it also adds to the story, commenting that he cut off his ears. That doesn't seem to add anything to the story, but and it's interesting because Simon cut off the ear of the one of the guards that was trying to seize Jesus, or I can't remember, but, and then Jesus just grabs it and like puts it back on. And also Arius Piso, the story is that he lost his ear when he was trying to slay Vitellius, who was the third of the year, the fourth of the four emperors' year, where Nero, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, and before Arius Piso was able to assassinate Vitellius cut off his ear. Okay, now this is from Luke 22:36. Jesus said, "He that has no sword, buy one." Jesus withdrew about a stone's cast and kneeled, saying, "Do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. That was Simon Peter, who did that. Okay, so the ear, cutting off the ear. In one case, it was bit off. The other case, it was cut off with a sword. But there is a sword in the other one, too. Neither had command of his sword, nor his hands. And it's in both cases, there's a high priest that's involved. And then there is injuring your head against a stone, which Jesus withdrew about a stone's cast and kneeled, saying, "Do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss," causing harm with his mouth. Okay, so these four parallels are all kind of run-of-the-mill, nothing that will devastate you or overpower you, nothing that is mean-spirited and mocking like many of the other parallels in the earlier, in the T, the V, and the S. Which are actually written earlier, but they appear later, because those are the later volumes of Josephus. Josephus is the War of the Jews was from 66 to 73 AD, but the first volume goes all the way back to 150 BC or something like that, and it leads up to the events. But the actual, so